I needed the money. Plain and simple. That's how I ended up on the docks at 5 in the morning, duffel bag slung over my shoulder, looking for a boat called the Mariner's Fortune. The fog was thick, making the whole place feel like something out of an old movie. I could barely see 20 feet ahead of me. I'd found the job listing online. Deep sea fishing crew, no experience necessary, good pay. After getting laid off from my warehouse job and falling 2 months behind on rent, I wasn't exactly in a position to be picky. The massive fishing vessel loomed out of the fog as I approached Slip 17. It was bigger than I'd expected, maybe 70 feet long, with rust stains streaking down its white hull. The name was painted in faded blue letters across the stern. "U. Morrison," a gruff voice called down from the deck. I looked up to see a bearded man in a captain's hat staring down at me. "Yeah, that's me, Daniel Morrison. Get aboard then. We're leaving in 20 minutes. I climbed the metal gangway, my boots clanging against the rungs. When I reached the top, the man extended a weathered hand. "Captain Williams, this your first time on a commercial vessel?" "Yes, sir," I admitted, trying to sound more confident than I felt. His handshake was like iron. He looked me up and down, his blue eyes narrowed beneath bushy eyebrows. The captain was shorter than me by an inch or so, but built like a brick wall. His salt and pepper beard was neatly trimmed, and deep lines creased his tanned face. "Follow me," he said, turning without waiting for a response. I followed him across the deck, stepping carefully over coiled ropes and metal fixtures I couldn't name. The boat swayed gently beneath my feet, and I had to adjust my stance to keep my balance. Captain Williams led me to a small cabin near the stern. Inside was a tiny desk bolted to the floor and a couple of chairs. He sat down and gestured for me to do the same. "Before we get underway, there are some rules you need to know." He pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket and handed it to me. "Memorize these. Follow them exactly." I unfolded the paper. Written in neat block letters were 6 rules. Rule 1. If you hear a bell over the water after sunset, do not look toward the sound. Rule 2. Never touch the water after midnight. Rule 3. If you see a man in a business suit on deck, offer him a cigarette. Rule 4. Do not respond if you hear someone calling your name from the water. Rule 5. If you hear singing coming from above deck, go below immediately. Rule 6. If you see a red light in the fog, close your eyes until it passes. I read through the list twice, waiting for the punchline. When none came, I looked up at the captain, who was watching me intently. "Got it?" he asked. "Yes, sir," I said, fighting back a smile. This had to be some kind of initiation thing, a way to mess with the new guy. I'd heard fishing crews were big on hazing rituals. "This isn't a joke, Morrison," Captain Williams said, as if reading my thoughts. "These rules keep you alive out there." "Right," I said, nodding seriously. "I understand." He stared at me for a long moment, then sighed. "Get your gear stowed and report to the main deck. We're heading out soon." I folded the paper and tucked it into my pocket, playing along. As soon as I left the cabin, I let myself grin. 6 weird rules to follow at sea. Classic new guy treatment. I'd go along with it, might even act scared if that's what they wanted. Whatever it took to fit in with the crew. I needed this job too badly to rock the boat. Literally. I found my quarters below deck, a cramped space with 4 bunks, 3 of which already had gear on them. I tossed my duffel onto the empty one and quickly unpacked my essentials. The space smelled like a mix of diesel fuel, sweat, and something fishy that I figured I'd better get used to. When I made my way back to the main deck, the boat was already pulling away from the dock. The engines rumbled beneath my feet as we slowly navigated through the harbor. The morning fog was starting to burn off, revealing a cloudless blue sky. Despite everything, I felt a little surge of excitement. I'd never been out on the open ocean before. "Hey, new guy," someone called. I turned to see a tall, broad-shouldered man with dark, wavy hair waving me over. He had a red bandana tied around his neck that stood out against his faded work shirt. "I'm Tom," he said, extending his hand. "Tom Rodriguez. You must be Daniel." "Yeah, that's right," I said, shaking his hand. "First time on a fishing boat?" he asked, his friendly smile crinkling the corners of his eyes. "That obvious, huh?" He laughed, a booming sound that seemed to carry across the entire deck. Your sea legs'll come in a day or two. Don't worry about it. 2 other men joined us. Tom introduced them as Jake Sullivan and Pete Martinez. Jake was older, maybe mid-40s, with reddish-brown hair going gray at the temples. He had a stocky build and didn't smile much, just gave me a quick nod. I noticed a silver chain with a cross hanging around his neck. Pete was younger, probably around my age, with short black hair and a wiry frame that looked stronger than it first appeared. He had a compass tattoo on his forearm that caught my eye. "So the captain gave you the rules, huh?" Pete asked, a slight smirk on his face. "Yeah," I said, playing it cool. "Memorized them already." Jake and Tom exchanged glances. "Good," Jake said simply. His voice had a slight Boston accent. "You'll want to remember those." Before I could respond, Captain Williams' voice boomed across the deck. "Stations, everyone. We've got work to do." The next several hours were a blur of activity. Tom took me under his wing, showing me the basics: how to prepare the long lines, bait the hooks, and operate the hydraulic equipment that would lower everything into the water. It was physically demanding work, and by midday my hands were already developing blisters. "You'll toughen up," Tom assured me during our brief lunch break. We sat on some crates, eating sandwiches and drinking coffee from thermoses. "First week's always the hardest. How long have you guys been doing this?" I asked, between bites. "I've been with the captain for 6 years, Tom said. "Jake's been here longer, almost 10. Pete joined last year." Pete nodded. "Best money I've ever made, even if the hours are brutal." "And the rules?" I asked casually. "You guys follow all those?" The mood shifted instantly. The 3 of them exchanged looks again. "Every single one," Jake said firmly. "No exceptions." "Right," I said, trying not to roll my eyes. They were really committed to this prank. The afternoon passed in much the same way as the morning hard work under the increasingly hot sun. By the time evening approached, we were miles from shore. I couldn't see land in any direction, just endless blue water stretching to the horizon. The sky was turning orange and purple as the sun began to set. Captain Williams called us all to gather near the wheelhouse before dinner. He looked each of us in the eye, his gaze lingering on me a bit longer than the others. "Night's coming," he said, his voice grave. "Remember the rules, all of them. No exceptions, no mistakes." The others nodded solemnly. I nodded too, trying to match their serious expressions. "Morrison," the captain said, "you stay close to the others tonight. Learn the night routine." "Yes, sir," I replied. As we dispersed, I caught Tom giving me a concerned look. "He's not kidding about the rules," Tom said quietly. "Just follow them, okay?" I was starting to get a little annoyed with how far they were taking this. "Sure thing," I said, unable to keep a hint of sarcasm from my voice. Tom frowned but didn't push it further. Night fell quickly out on the water. The stars came out in numbers I'd never seen before, with no city lights to dim them. Under different circumstances, I might have found it beautiful, but after 12 hours of hard labor, all I wanted was sleep. We worked for another 2 hours under floodlights, bringing in the day's catch and preparing for tomorrow. My muscles ached in places I didn't know could ache. Finally, Captain Williams announced we could break for dinner and then set up the night watch rotation. Over a simple meal of stew and bread in the galley, I noticed how the mood had changed. The easy conversation from earlier was gone, replaced by a tense silence. Even Tom seemed subdued, glancing occasionally toward the portholes as if checking for something outside. "So what's the deal with these rules?" I finally asked, breaking the silence. "You guys act like they're a matter of life and death." Pete looked at me sharply. "That's because they are." Jake put down his spoon. "You think this is some kind of joke? Some initiation thing?" "Well, yeah," I admitted. "I mean, come on. Don't look at bells? Offer cigarettes to guys in suits? It sounds like something you'd make up to mess with the new guy." Captain Williams appeared in the doorway of the galley. I hadn't heard him approach. "Morrison," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Those rules aren't a game. They're not a joke. They're not an initiation." The others were looking at me now, their expressions a mix of concern and something else. Fear, maybe. "Every single one of those rules exists because someone died learning it was necessary," the captain continued. "You follow them, you live. You don't, you die. It's that simple." He said it with such conviction that for a moment I almost believed him. Almost. "Yes, sir," I said, trying to sound appropriately chastened. "I understand." The captain held my gaze for a long moment, then shook his head slightly. "Get some rest. You've got the 4 a.m. watch with Pete." After he left, an uncomfortable silence fell over the galley. I felt like I'd committed some terrible faux pas. "Look," Tom finally said, "just follow the rules, okay, whether you believe in them or not." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak without sounding skeptical. These guys were either the best actors I'd ever met, or they genuinely believed in this supernatural nonsense. Either way, I decided it was best to just play along. As I lay in my bunk that night, listening to the creaking of the boat and the soft snores of my crewmates, I pulled out the list of rules and read through them again by the dim light coming through the small porthole. They still seemed ridiculous to me, the kind of superstitious nonsense that old sailors might have believed centuries ago. I folded the paper and tucked it back into my pocket. Whatever game they were playing, I'd go along with it. The job paid well and I needed the money. If pretending to be scared of bells and red lights was part of the deal, so be it. What I didn't realize then was just how wrong I was. The rules weren't a joke or a prank or an initiation ritual. They were a survival guide for something I couldn't yet comprehend, and my skepticism was about to be put to the test in ways I never could have imagined. I'd been on the Mariner's Fortune for 2 days now, and I was starting to get the hang of things. The work was harder than anything I'd done at the warehouse, but there was something satisfying about it. By the end of each day, my muscles ached in ways I didn't know possible, but I slept better than I had in months. The second night at sea was clear, with stars scattered across the sky like someone had flicked a paintbrush loaded with white paint. I was on the deck, helping Pete coil some ropes. Captain Williams had us working in shifts, and this was the late one. Most of the crew was below deck, trying to get some sleep before their turn came up. "You're getting better at that," Pete said, nodding at my hands as I wound the thick rope. "Thanks. Still feels weird though." My palms were already developing calluses, but they still burned from the rough fibers. "Give it a week. Your hands'll toughen up." I was about to answer when I heard it, a sound carrying over the water. A bell. Not loud, but clear enough to cut through the constant noise of the boat and the waves. It rang once, then again, the sound seeming to come from somewhere off the starboard side. My head started to turn automatically toward the sound. It was such a natural reaction. Hear something unusual, look toward it. But then I remembered the first rule Captain Williams had given us. Never look toward the ocean when you hear a bell. I forced my eyes down to the deck, focusing hard on the rope in my hands. The bell rang again, and my neck muscles twitched with the urge to look. It was like fighting against a magnet pulling at my head. "You hear that?" I asked Pete, keeping my eyes firmly on the deck. "Hear what?" Pete looked confused, still working on his own coil of rope. The bell sounded again, clearer this time. How could he not hear it? I was about to ask him again when I noticed movement from the corner of my eye. Tom Rodriguez was walking across the deck, heading straight for the railing on the starboard side. Tom moved like he was in a trance, his eyes fixed on something out in the darkness beyond the boat. The bell rang once more, and Tom's pace quickened. "Tom," I called out, still keeping my eyes down. "Hey, Tom." He didn't respond, didn't even flinch. It was like he couldn't hear me at all. "What's up with him?" I asked Pete, nodding in Tom's direction without looking up. Pete glanced over. "Who?" "Tom. He's heading for the railing." Pete looked where I'd indicated, but shrugged. "I don't see anyone, man." That didn't make sense. Tom was right there, not 20 feet away, now standing at the railing and staring out at the water. I risked a quick glance, making sure to look only at Tom and not past him toward the ocean. He was gripping the metal rail, leaning forward slightly, completely motionless. "Tom," I called again, louder this time. "Hey, remember the rules, man." Nothing, not even a twitch to show he'd heard me. I turned to Pete. "I'm gonna go get him. Something's wrong." Pete looked concerned now. "Get who?" "Daniel. There's nobody there." I started to argue, but the bell rang again, louder than before. I kept my eyes firmly on the deck as I moved toward where Tom was standing. The sound was pulling at me, making it almost physically painful not to look. I focused on Tom's boots, using them as a guide. "Tom, come on, man. Let's go below deck." I reached out, expecting to grab his arm. My hand met empty air. I looked up in confusion, careful to keep my gaze on the spot where Tom had been standing, not letting my eyes drift past the railing. But Tom wasn't there anymore. "Tom," I called, panic rising in my throat. I took another step forward, reaching the railing myself. I gripped it tight, fighting the urge to look out at the water. "Tom." The bell rang one final time, fainter now, as if moving away. Then silence. I spun around, scanning the deck. "Pete, Tom's gone." Pete dropped his rope and hurried over. "What do you mean gone?" "Daniel, there was nobody here. He was right here, standing right where I am now." I was shouting now, my heart racing. "We need to tell the captain. Tom's missing." Pete looked genuinely worried now, but I could tell he thought I was losing it. Still, he nodded. "Okay, let's go find Captain Williams." We woke the captain, who immediately ordered a full search of the boat. Jake Sullivan was roused from sleep to help, and the three of us checked every corner of the Mariner's Fortune while Captain Williams stayed at the helm. We looked in the sleeping quarters, the galley, the storage areas, even the tiny bathroom. No sign of Tom anywhere. After an hour of searching, we gathered back on deck. Captain Williams' face was grim in the dim light. "Nothing?" he asked. Jake shook his head, checked everywhere twice. "He's not on board. I'm telling you, he was right here," I insisted, pointing to the railing. "He was looking out at the water when that bell was ringing." "What bell?" Jake asked, frowning. "You didn't hear it. It was clear as day." Jake and Pete exchanged looks. Captain Williams's expression darkened. "Both of you go below," he ordered Jake and Pete. "I need to talk to Daniel." They hesitated but followed orders. When they were gone, Captain Williams turned to me. "Tell me exactly what happened," he said, his voice low and serious. "Everything you saw and heard." I explained about the bell, how I'd remembered the first rule and kept my eyes down. How Tom had walked to the railing like he was in a trance. How he'd vanished when I wasn't looking directly at him. Captain Williams listened without interrupting. When I finished, he sighed heavily and looked out at the dark water for a long moment. "Tom broke the first rule," he said finally. "So the rules are real?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "This isn't some kind of initiation thing for new guys." Captain Williams gave me a hard look. Did I ever say it was? No. But I thought. "Those rules keep you alive out here," he cut me off. Tom knew that. He'd been with me for 3 years. He paused, his weathered face looking suddenly older in the dim light. "But sometimes the bell is hard to resist." A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the night air. What happens to people who look? What happened to Tom? Captain Williams didn't answer right away. He stared out at the dark water for so long I thought he might not respond at all. "He's gone," he said finally. "That's all you need to know." But no, his voice was sharp. "No more questions tonight. You followed the rule. That's why you're still here." He put a heavy hand on my shoulder. "Remember that." He walked away, leaving me alone on the deck. I stood there for a long time, staring down at my feet, afraid to look up at the vast, dark ocean surrounding us. The rules that had seemed so silly just yesterday now felt like a lifeline. I thought about Tom, about how he'd helped me on my first day, showing me the ropes, laughing at my clumsy attempts to help with the nets. Now he was gone, just like that, because he looked when he heard a bell. I shivered and headed below deck, suddenly desperate to be away from the open air and the sound of waves lapping against the hull. As I climbed down the ladder, I couldn't shake the feeling that something out there in the darkness had called to Tom specifically, something that had rung a bell only he and I could hear, and I wondered what other sounds might be waiting for us out on the water. I was working the night shift on the third night out at sea. The deck was slick with ocean spray, and I'd been assigned to check the nets near the starboard side. Captain Williams had been pushing us hard since Tom disappeared, like he was trying to keep us too busy to think about what happened. The boat rocked under my feet as I moved carefully across the deck. My boots squeaked against the wet surface, and I kept one hand on the railing whenever possible. The work lights cast long shadows across the deck, making it hard to see where the puddles were deepest. "Morrison," Pete called from the other side of the deck. Captain wants those nets checked before 2. On it, I shouted back, picking up my pace a little. That was my mistake. I stepped on a particularly slick patch and my foot shot out from under me. I went down hard, landing on my side, and immediately started sliding toward the edge of the boat. My heart jumped into my throat as I scrambled for something to grab onto. My legs went over the side first, and for a terrifying second, I thought I was going overboard. I managed to catch the bottom rail with one hand, my body dangling halfway off the boat. The cold water was just inches below my boots. That's when I saw it. Something moved beneath the surface. Something massive. At first I thought it was just the reflection of the boat's lights on the waves, but then I realized the shape was moving independently of the water. It was dark and solid, sliding beneath us like a shadow with purpose. "Shit," I whispered, my fingers starting to slip on the wet metal. "Morrison." Jake's voice came from somewhere behind me. "Hold on." I felt strong hands grab the back of my jacket, and Jake hauled me up and over the railing. I collapsed onto the deck, breathing hard, my heart pounding in my chest. "You okay?" Jake asked, crouching next to me. His face was tight with concern. "Yeah," I gasped. "Thanks." I almost went over. Jake nodded, his expression grim. "Rule 2, Morrison, don't touch the water after midnight." I checked my watch. It was 12:45. The second rule. I'd thought it was just some weird superstition, but the look on Jake's face told me otherwise. "Did you see something down there?" he asked quietly. I hesitated, then nodded. "Something big, moving under the boat." Jake helped me to my feet, keeping his voice low. "Don't mention it to the others, especially not to Pete. He's already spooked enough after what happened to Tom." I nodded, but my mind was racing. What had I just seen? It was bigger than any fish I'd ever heard of. Bigger even than most whales. And the way it moved. Deliberate, almost intelligent. For the rest of my shift, I stayed well away from the edges of the boat. Every time the vessel rocked, I imagined that thing down there, maybe bumping against us, testing us. When my shift ended at 4 in the morning, I couldn't sleep. I lay in my bunk replaying what I'd seen in my mind. The rules kept running through my head. Don't look at the ocean when you hear a bell. Don't touch the water after midnight. I dismissed them as hazing for the new guy, but now I wasn't so sure. I must have dozed off eventually because I woke to Pete shaking my shoulder. "Captain wants everyone on deck," he said. "Something's up." I pulled on my clothes and followed Pete up to the main deck. The morning was gray and overcast, the sea choppy around us. Captain Williams stood by the wheelhouse, his face grim. Jake was already there, looking like he hadn't slept much either. "We're changing course," Captain Williams announced when we were all gathered, heading back toward the shipping lanes. "What about the catch?" Pete asked. "We've got enough," the captain said shortly. "We're heading back." No one argued. There was something in the captain's tone that discouraged questions. As the others dispersed to their stations, I hung back. "Captain," I said quietly, "last night I saw something in the water." He looked at me sharply. "What kind of something?" "I don't know. It was big, really big, moving under the boat." Captain Williams was quiet for a long moment. "That's why we're changing course," he finally said. "It's been following us since yesterday." A chill ran down my spine. "What is it?" "Nothing you need to worry about as long as you follow the rules." He gave me a hard look. "You understand now, don't you? Why the rules matter?" I nodded slowly. "Tom broke the first rule. He looked when he heard the bell, and he let go of the railing," the captain added. "That's the part most people miss. The railing is iron, old iron. It offers some protection." That explained why Tom had vanished the moment I'd reached for him and found nothing but empty air. He'd already let go of the railing. "The second rule," I said, "don't touch the water after midnight. That's because of whatever that thing is down there." Captain Williams nodded. "The water connects to it. Touching the water after midnight is like ringing a dinner bell." I swallowed hard. "And the other rules?" "Each one exists for a reason," he said. "Each one has a price if you break it." Throughout the day we all felt it, the presence beneath us. The boat would sometimes dip slightly, like something was pressing up against the hull. Twice I saw Pete and Jake exchange worried glances when a shadow passed beneath us, visible even in the daylight. That night, I couldn't sleep again. I went up on deck around 11, careful to stay in the center, away from the edges. Jake was already there, smoking a cigarette. "Couldn't sleep either?" he asked, offering me one. I took it and let him light it for me. "No, keep thinking about what's down there." Jake nodded, looking out at the dark water. "Been sailing these waters for 15 years, only seen it 3 times. What is it?" He shrugged. "Don't know, don't want to know. Captain's been out here longer than any of us, and even he doesn't talk about it." We stood in silence for a while, smoking and watching the water. Then Jake pointed. "There." A shadow moved beneath the surface, larger than the boat itself. It circled us once, then twice, its outline barely visible in the moonlight reflecting off the water. "Jesus," I whispered. "Now you know," Jake said quietly, "why we follow the rules." I nodded, suddenly understanding with perfect clarity. The rules weren't a joke or a prank or even just superstition. They were survival. Each one existed because someone had died learning the hard way what lurked out here in the deep water. I crushed out my cigarette and made sure the butt went into the can, not over the side. No sense in drawing attention to ourselves. "I'm going to try to get some sleep," I told Jake. He nodded. "Smart. We've got early shift." As I headed below deck, I ran through the rules in my head again, committing them to memory. Don't look at the ocean when you hear a bell. Don't touch the water after midnight. If you see a man in a suit, offer him a cigarette. Don't fish during the full moon. If you hear singing, go below deck immediately. If you see a red light in the fog, close your eyes. 6 simple rules, 6 ways to stay alive. I lay in my bunk, listening to the creaking of the boat and the soft lapping of waves against the hull. Somewhere below us, something massive was swimming, waiting for one of us to make a mistake. I wasn't going to be the one, not after what I'd seen. I was on night watch, leaning against the railing and staring up at the stars. The sky was clear, which was a nice change after the fog we'd had earlier. I'd been on the boat for almost a week now, and even though we'd lost Tom and I'd nearly gone overboard myself, I was starting to get used to the rhythm of life at sea. That's when I saw him. A man in a business suit standing near the bow of the ship. At first I thought I was seeing things. Who the hell would be wearing a suit on a fishing boat? I blinked hard, expecting him to disappear, but he was still there. Tall guy, dark suit, just standing there looking out at the water. I took a step toward him, then stopped. Something about this felt wrong. Really wrong. I ran through the rules in my head. Captain Williams had drilled them into us. And after what happened to Tom, I wasn't taking any chances. The 3rd rule suddenly popped into my head. If you see someone in formal attire on deck, offer them a cigarette. Don't speak to them otherwise. I patted my pocket where I kept the pack I'd bought before we left port. I wasn't a regular smoker, but Jake had convinced me to bring some along. Long nights at sea, he'd said. You'll want something to pass the time. I pulled out the pack and walked slowly toward the man in the suit. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. He didn't turn to look at me as I approached, just kept staring out at the dark water. When I was about 5 feet away, I cleared my throat. The man turned his head slightly, acknowledging me without fully facing me. I held out the pack of cigarettes. "Cigarette?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. The man turned fully toward me then. His face was pale, almost glowing in the moonlight. He smiled, not a friendly smile, but not threatening either, just empty. He reached out and took a cigarette from the pack, and then he was gone. Not like he walked away or jumped overboard. He literally vanished right in front of me. 1 second he was there, the next, nothing. Just the empty deck where he'd been standing. I stood frozen for a good minute, the cigarette pack still held out in front of me. Finally, I shoved it back in my pocket with shaking hands and backed away from the spot. I didn't tell anyone about it that night. What would I even say? Hey, I just gave a cigarette to a ghost in a suit? I'd sound crazy. I didn't sleep much after my shift ended. I kept seeing that empty smile whenever I closed my eyes. The next morning, I was in the galley trying to force down some coffee when Pete walked in. He looked as tired as I felt, with dark circles under his eyes. "Rough night?" I asked as he poured himself some coffee. Pete nodded, staring into his mug. "Yeah, Weird shit happening on this boat. What kind of weird shit? I asked, suddenly alert. Pete glanced around, making sure we were alone. Saw a guy on deck last night, wearing a suit of all things, just standing there. My stomach dropped. What did you do? Remembered the rules, Pete said. Offered him a smoke. He took it and then he made a poof gesture with his hands. He disappeared. I finished for him. Pete's eyes widened. You saw him too? I nodded. Last night, during my watch, we sat in silence for a minute, both processing this. Then Pete leaned forward. You know what's really messed up? I mentioned it to Captain Williams this morning. He just nodded like it was normal. Said Jake saw him 2 nights ago too. So all of us have seen this. Whatever it is, I asked. Seems like it, Pete said. Captain says it happens every trip. Says that's why the rule exists. Did he say what it is, or what happens if you don't give it a cigarette? Pete shook his head. Nope, and I didn't ask. Some things you're better off not knowing, you know. I thought about Tom disappearing after hearing the bell, and how I'd nearly gone overboard myself. Pete was right. Some things were better left unknown. The rest of the day passed without incident. We worked the nets, sorted the catch, and tried not to think about men in suits who vanished or what might be swimming beneath us. By evening, I was exhausted enough that I thought I might actually sleep. I just settled into my bunk when I heard it singing. Faint at first, like it was coming from far away but growing clearer. A woman's voice, beautiful and haunting, singing words I couldn't quite make out. It was coming from above deck. The 5th rule flashed in my mind. If you hear singing after sunset, go below deck immediately and stay there until it stops. I was already below deck, but Jake had taken the night watch. He was up there probably hearing the same thing. I jumped out of my bunk and shook Pete awake. Pete, you hear that? I whispered. He sat up groggily, then his eyes widened as the singing filtered down to us. Shit, that's the 5th rule. Jake's up there, I said. Pete swore again. We gotta warn him. We hurried to the ladder leading up to the deck. I was about to climb up when Pete grabbed my arm. Wait, he said. The rule says to stay below deck. But Jake, I know, but we can call to him from here. Pete was right. I cupped my hands around my mouth and shouted up the ladder. Jake, get down here. The singing continued, louder now. It was beautiful in a way that made my skin crawl. Jake, I tried again. It's the 5th rule. Get below deck. I heard footsteps above moving toward the ladder. Jake's face appeared at the top, looking down at us. You guys hear that? He asked, his voice oddly calm. Yes. That's why you need to get down here, I said. Jake shook his head. It's beautiful. I want to see who's singing. There's no one singing, man, Pete said. It's like the bell Tom heard. It's not real. Sounds real to me, Jake said, and his face disappeared from view. Jake, I shouted, starting up the ladder. Pete yanked me back down. Don't, you'll break the rule too. We can't just let him stay up there, I argued. We don't have a choice, Pete said grimly. He made his decision. I stood at the bottom of the ladder, torn between following the rules that had kept me alive so far and trying to save Jake. The singing grew louder, more enticing. Part of me wanted to go up and hear it better, see what Jake was seeing. Close the hatch. Captain Williams's voice came from behind us, making us both jump. But Jake's still up there, I protested. Close it, the captain repeated, his voice leaving no room for argument. Pete reached up and pulled the hatch closed, sealing us off from the deck above and muffling the singing slightly. Jake's made his choice, Captain Williams said. Nothing we can do for him now. We can't just leave him up there, I said. You want to join him? The captain asked coldly. I stared at Captain Williams, his words hitting me like a punch to the gut. The singing continued above us, muffled by the closed hatch, but still audible, beautiful and terrible at the same time. What happens to people who hear the singing? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The captain's face was grim in the dim light. Nothing good. That was all he said before turning and walking back toward his quarters. Pete and I exchanged looks, both of us knowing there was nothing we could do. We were trapped down here by rules we didn't understand but had seen the consequences of breaking. I'm going back to my bunk, Pete said after a minute. Nothing we can do now except wait it out. I nodded, but I couldn't bring myself to leave the ladder. I sat down on the bottom rung, my back against the wall, and waited. The singing continued for what felt like hours. Sometimes it would fade a bit, then come back stronger than before. I kept picturing Jake up there following the voice, looking for its source. I must have dozed off at some point because I woke with a start when I realized the singing had stopped. The silence felt heavy and wrong after all that time listening to the voice. I checked my watch. It was almost 4 in the morning. The singing had gone on for nearly 3 hours. I stood up, my legs stiff from sitting on the hard metal rung, and looked up at the hatch. Part of me wanted to open it, to go up and check on Jake. But another part, the part that had seen Tom disappear and had nearly gone overboard myself, kept me rooted to the spot. It stopped. Pete's voice came from behind me. He must have been waiting too, unable to sleep. "Yeah," I said. "Should we wait for morning?" Pete said firmly. That's what the captain would say. He was right, of course. Whatever had happened up there, it had already happened. Going up now wouldn't change anything, and might just put us in danger too. I went back to my bunk but didn't sleep. I just lay there staring at the ceiling, listening to the creaks and groans of the boat, waiting for dawn. When the first gray light of morning finally came through the small porthole, I was already dressed and ready to go up. Pete was too. We climbed the ladder together, Pete pushing open the hatch. The deck was empty. No sign of Jake anywhere. "Jake?" I called out, my voice sounding small in the vast emptiness of the ocean around us. No answer. We searched the entire deck, checking every corner, every possible hiding spot. Nothing. Jake was gone, just like Tom. Captain Williams emerged from his cabin as the sun was fully rising. He took one look at our faces and knew. "He's gone, isn't he?" he asked, though it wasn't really a question. I nodded, a lump in my throat making it hard to speak. "The singing?" the captain asked. "Yes," Pete answered. "We tried to warn him, but he wouldn't come down." The captain sighed heavily, looking suddenly older than his years. "The sea takes what it wants," he said quietly. "Always has." We stood there in silence for a long moment, the three of us now the only ones left on a boat meant for a crew of 5. The rules that had seemed so strange, so unnecessary when I first came aboard, now felt like the only thing keeping us alive. "What do we do now?" I finally asked. "We finished the job," Captain Williams said firmly. "We've got enough catch to head back to port. 2 more days, then we're home." 2 more days. It seemed like an eternity. 2 more nights of bells and men in suits and singing and whatever else was waiting for us out here. I looked out at the water, so calm and innocent looking in the morning light. What was out there? What had taken Tom and Jake? What would have taken me if I'd touched the water that night? Or if I'd gone up on deck when the singing started? I didn't know, and part of me didn't want to know. All I knew was that I was going to follow every single one of those rules to the letter until we reached port. And then I was going to get as far away from the ocean as possible. But even as I thought it, I felt something tugging at me. A strange pull, like the ocean itself had hooked something deep inside me and wasn't letting go. I had a feeling that no matter how far inland I went, the sea would call me back eventually, and that scared me more than anything else. I woke up to the sound of Captain Williams shouting from the deck. My eyes felt like they'd been glued shut, and my body ached from the long shifts we'd been pulling since Tom disappeared. I rolled out of my bunk, nearly hitting my head on Pete's bed above me. "Morrison, Martinez, get up here now." The captain's voice boomed down the ladder. Pete was already pulling on his boots. "That doesn't sound good," he muttered. We climbed up to the deck, and the morning sun hit my eyes hard. I squinted, letting them adjust to the brightness. When they did, I saw Captain Williams kneeling next to something on the far side of the deck, something that looked like a person. "Oh shit," Pete whispered beside me. We walked over and my stomach dropped. Jake Sullivan was lying face up on the deck, his eyes wide open and staring at nothing. His skin had a bluish tint, and his mouth was frozen in what looked like a smile. It was the creepiest thing I'd ever seen. "Is he?" I couldn't finish the sentence. "Dead?" "Yeah." Captain Williams stood up slowly, his knees cracking. "Found him like this when I came up for the morning check." I remembered the singing from last night, the beautiful woman's voice that had drifted across the water. Jake had refused to come down below deck. He'd wanted to see who was singing. It was the singing, wasn't it? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The captain nodded. Rule 5. Never stay on deck if you hear singing after sunset. He looked down at Jake's body. He broke it. Pete turned away, running his hand through his hair. Jesus Christ. Help me with him, Captain Williams said. We need to move him. We wrapped Jake's body in a tarp from the storage locker. It felt wrong, handling him like cargo, but there wasn't much else we could do out here. Captain Williams said we'd bring him back to port for a proper burial. The whole time we worked, I couldn't stop thinking about how Jake had saved me from going overboard just days ago. Now he was gone because he'd broken one of the rules. After we secured Jake's body in the cold storage area, Captain Williams called us to the wheelhouse. Listen up, he said, his voice gruff but steady. We're down to 3 men now. That means longer shifts and more work for each of us. We're 4 days out from port, and I need you both to keep it together until we get there. Yes, sir, Pete and I said almost in unison. And for God's sake, follow the rules. All of them, no exceptions. The captain looked at each of us hard. I've lost enough men on this trip. The rest of the day passed in a blur. We worked the nets, sorted the catch, and tried not to think about Jake's body below deck or Tom's disappearance. By the time night fell, I was exhausted, but my mind wouldn't shut off. I kept hearing that singing in my head, wondering what Jake had seen before he died. I must have fallen asleep at some point because I woke up to complete darkness. At first, I thought the power had gone out, but then I realized something was different. The usual gentle rocking of the boat felt muted, and the air seemed thicker somehow. I climbed out of my bunk and made my way to the small porthole in our quarters. I couldn't see anything outside. Not the stars, not the moon, not even the water. It was like someone had wrapped the entire boat in a thick blanket. Pete, I whispered, shaking his shoulder. Pete, wake up, he groaned and rolled over. What time is it? I don't know, but something's wrong. Look outside. Pete leaned over and peered through the porthole. Fog, he said. Really thick fog. We dressed quickly and headed up to the deck. Captain Williams was already at the helm, peering intently into the wall of white that surrounded us. Never seen fog this thick, he said when he noticed us. Can't see more than a few feet in any direction. The fog was so dense it seemed to swallow the beam from the boat's lights. It was like we were floating in a cloud, completely cut off from the rest of the world. The air felt damp against my skin, and I could taste the salt on my lips. What should we do? I asked. Not much we can do except wait it out, the captain replied. I've dropped our speed and set the radar. We'll just have to be extra careful. Pete and I took up positions on either side of the deck, keeping watch for anything that might appear out of the fog. Not that we could see much. The white mist swirled around us, sometimes thinning enough to see maybe 10 feet out, then thickening again until I could barely make out my own hand in front of my face. I'd been at my post for about an hour when I noticed something strange, a faint reddish glow in the fog off the port side. At first, I thought it might be a reflection from one of our running lights, but this was different. It was a deep, pulsing red, like a heartbeat. Then I remembered the 6th rule. If you see a red light in the fog, close your eyes immediately. My heart started pounding. I squeezed my eyes shut tight, turning my head away from the light. I remembered all the other rules that had been broken on this trip. Tom had looked when he heard the bell. I'd almost touched the water after midnight. Jake had stayed on deck during the singing. And now this red light. Pete, I called out, my eyes still firmly closed. Pete, close your eyes. There's a red light in the fog. I heard no response. Keeping my eyes shut, I felt my way along the railing, moving toward where Pete should have been standing. Pete, did you hear me? Close your eyes. Still nothing. The silence was broken only by the gentle lapping of waves against the hull and the distant hum of the engine. I was getting worried now. I needed to find Pete, but I couldn't open my eyes. I remembered the captain saying each rule had a price if broken. I didn't want to find out what the price for this one was. After what felt like forever, I heard Captain Williams's voice. Morrison, where are you? Over here, I called back. Captain, there's a red light in the fog. I've got my eyes closed. I heard his footsteps approaching. Good man, he said, his voice closer now. Keep them closed. Have you seen Martinez? No, sir. I called out to him, but he didn't answer. The captain swore under his breath. Stay here. Keep your eyes shut. I'll find him. I stood there, gripping the railing, my eyes squeezed shut so tight they hurt. I could still sense the red glow through my eyelids. It seemed to be getting brighter, pulsing with an unnatural rhythm. Curiosity gnawed at me. What was that light? What would happen if I just took a quick peek? I cracked one eye open, just the tiniest bit, just enough to see through my lashes. The red light was still there, hovering in the fog like a malevolent star, and standing at the railing, staring directly at it, was Pete. His face was illuminated by the crimson glow, his expression one of wonder and horror mixed together. He wasn't blinking, wasn't moving at all, just staring. Pete, I shouted, shutting my eye again immediately. Pete, close your eyes. He didn't respond. I heard Captain Williams moving across the deck, his footsteps quick and purposeful. Martinez, the captain barked. Close your damn eyes, son. I don't know how long we stayed like that, me with my eyes shut tight, listening to the captain trying to get through to Pete. Minutes, hours, time seemed to stretch and warp in the fog. Then suddenly, I felt a change. The air seemed lighter somehow, and the red glow that I could sense even through my closed eyelids began to fade. It's clearing, Captain Williams said after a while. The fog's lifting. I waited until he told me it was safe before I opened my eyes. The fog was indeed dissipating, revealing patches of night sky and the dark water around us. The red light was gone, but Pete was on his knees, his hands covering his face, making a sound I'd never heard before, a high, keening wail that didn't seem human. Captain Williams was kneeling beside him, trying to pull his hands away from his face. Let me see, son. Let me see what happened. When Pete finally lowered his hands, I had to turn away. His eyes were ruined, the whites now an angry red. The irises clouded over like they'd been boiled. Tears of blood ran down his cheeks. I can't see, Pete sobbed. Captain, I can't see anything. The captain's face went grim. Morrison, get the first aid kit from the wheelhouse. Now, I ran to get it, my legs shaking. When I returned, Captain Williams was leading Pete carefully to a seat, one hand on his shoulder, talking to him in a low, steady voice. We did what we could for Pete's eyes, washing them with clean water and applying the antiseptic ointment from the kit. Pete sat through it all, shaking and repeating over and over that he couldn't see. Will his sight come back? I asked the captain quietly as we finished bandaging Pete's eyes. Captain Williams shook his head. No, the damage is done. He looked at me, his weathered face more serious than I'd ever seen it. That's the price for breaking the 6th rule. Later, after we'd gotten Pete settled in his bunk, Captain Williams and I stood on deck. The fog was completely gone now, and the stars were out again, cold and distant. You understand now, don't you? The captain said, not looking at me, but out at the dark water. Why I gave you those rules the first day. I nodded, then realized he wasn't watching me. Yes, I said. I understand, and I did. Each rule corresponded to something real, something dangerous out there in the ocean. The bell that had taken Tom, the thing beneath the water that I'd nearly touched, the man in the suit who disappeared, the singing that had killed Jake, and now the red light that had blinded Pete. There are things out there, Captain Williams said, his voice low. Things most people never see. Things they wouldn't believe if you told them. He finally turned to look at me. That's why the rules exist, not as some kind of hazing ritual or superstition. They keep us alive. I thought about how I'd almost laughed when he first handed me that list, how I'd thought it was just some old sailor's nonsense. I wasn't laughing now. 4 days, the captain said. 4 days until we reach port. Think you can make it? Yes, sir, I said, and I meant it. I'd follow every rule to the letter. I'd seen what happened when you didn't. I went below deck to check on Pete. He was lying in his bunk, the bandages around his eyes stark white against his skin. His breathing was steady, so I thought he might be asleep. I turned to leave. Morrison, his voice stopped me. That you? Yeah, it's me, I said, moving back to his side. How are you feeling? Like shit, he said with a weak laugh that quickly turned into a sob. I'm blind, man. Fucking blind. I didn't know what to say to that. There were no words that could make this better. "I saw it," Pete whispered. "The light. It was beautiful. I couldn't look away." His hands clutched at the blanket. "What was it? Do you know?" I shook my head, then remembered he couldn't see me. "No," I said, "and I don't want to know." Pete was quiet for a long moment. "You know what's weird? I can still see it when I close my eyes. That red light. It's like it's burned into my brain." I sat with him until he fell asleep, listening to the creaking of the boat and the distant sound of the waves. Outside, the ocean stretched in all directions, dark and vast and full of things I'd never imagined could exist. Things that waited just beyond the edge of what we could see or understand. Things that had rules. I watched the coastline grow larger as we approached the harbor. After everything that had happened, I never thought I'd be so happy to see land again. The Mariner's Fortune cut through the waves, heading back to port after what felt like the longest trip of my life. Captain Williams stood at the helm, his face unreadable as always. Pete sat nearby on a crate, his eyes still bandaged, hands gripping the edge to steady himself against the boat's movement. "Almost there," I said to Pete, though I wasn't sure if it was more for his benefit or mine. He nodded. "I can smell it. The harbor always has that mix of diesel and fish markets." I looked back at the water stretching behind us. Somewhere out there, Tom and Jake were gone. Just gone. And Pete would never see again after looking at that red light in the fog. All because of rules that sounded like superstitious nonsense when I first heard them. Rules that turned out to be deadly serious. The harbor came into clearer view as we approached. Other fishing boats were docked along the piers, crews unloading their catches or making repairs. Normal, everyday stuff that seemed so foreign to me now. I'd left this place as just another guy looking for work. I was coming back as something else entirely. Captain Williams guided the boat toward our slip with practiced ease. I moved to help with the docking procedures, tossing lines to the dock workers and securing the vessel. My muscles worked automatically, having learned these tasks over the past couple weeks. It felt good to do something normal and mechanical after everything we'd been through. "Morrison," Captain Williams called from the wheelhouse. "Help Martinez down to the dock once we're secure." I nodded and went to Pete, taking his arm gently. "Come on, buddy. Let's get you off this boat." Pete gripped my forearm tightly. "Thanks, man. I'd probably walk straight into the water without you." I guided him carefully down the gangway, one step at a time. His foot slipped once, and I tightened my grip, remembering how close I'd come to falling overboard that night. How Jake had saved me, only to be lost himself days later. Once we reached the dock, Captain Williams joined us. He looked tired, the lines in his face deeper than when we'd set out. "I've called for medical transport," he said. "They'll take Martinez to the hospital for proper treatment." Pete nodded. "What about the pay, Captain?" "Full shares for everyone," Williams replied. "I'll have it wired to your accounts by tomorrow." I stood awkwardly, not sure what to say. We'd lost 2 men. Pete was blind, and here we were talking about money like this was just another fishing trip. An ambulance arrived about 15 minutes later. The paramedics helped Pete into the back, asking questions about his condition. I watched as they drove away, wondering if I'd ever see him again. "Morrison," Captain Williams said, breaking into my thoughts. "Help me unload the catch. We still have work to do." For the next few hours, we worked with the dock workers to unload our haul. It was a good catch, despite everything. The fish buyers seemed pleased, and I overheard them talking about the price per pound. Captain Williams would make a decent profit, even with 2 fewer crew members to pay. As we finished up, I noticed a group of men walking down the dock toward our boat. 3 guys, all carrying duffel bags. They looked just like I must have looked 2 weeks ago. Eager for work, clueless about what they were getting into. "New crew?" I asked Williams as he signed off on the last of the paperwork. He nodded. "Need to replace what we lost." I watched the men approach. One was tall and lanky, maybe in his early 20s. Another was older, probably in his 40s, with a weathered face. The third was somewhere in between, stocky and confident in his walk. "You Captain Williams?" the older one called out. Williams turned. "That's right, you must be Donovan, Miller, and Acosta." They nodded, introducing themselves. I stood back watching the interaction. It was surreal, like watching myself from 2 weeks ago. These guys had no idea what they were signing up for. "Get your gear stowed," Williams told them. "We head out tomorrow morning at 5. The men nodded and headed up the gangway. I waited until they were out of earshot before turning to Williams. "Are you going to tell them?" I asked quietly. "About the rules." Williams looked at me for a long moment. "What do you think?" I didn't answer right away. Part of me wanted to run after those guys, to warn them about what they were getting into. But another part understood why Williams kept the rules mysterious until we were already at sea. Who would believe it? Who would take it seriously until they had to? "They wouldn't believe it coming from me," I finally said. Williams nodded. "They never do. Not until they see for themselves." I helped finish securing the boat, then gathered my things. My duffel felt lighter than when I'd arrived, like I'd left pieces of myself out on the water. Maybe I had. As I walked down the gangway for what should have been the last time, I stopped and looked back at the Mariner's Fortune. Despite everything, the horror, the loss, the fear, I felt a strange pull. The ocean had shown me things I couldn't explain, things most people would never see or believe, and somehow, that knowledge felt valuable, even if it was terrible. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the folded paper with the 6 rules. I'd memorized them by now, could recite them in my sleep. I should throw it away, walk off this dock, and never look back. That would be the smart thing to do. Instead, I carefully refolded the paper and tucked it back into my pocket. I stood there for a long time, watching the new crew members move around the deck, getting familiar with what would be their home for the next trip. Would they all make it back? Would Williams give them the rules in time? The sun was starting to set, casting long shadows across the dock. I should go find a motel, get some real sleep in a bed that didn't rock with the waves. But my feet didn't want to move away from the water. I understood now why sailors always came back to the sea, even after the worst voyages. Once you'd seen what was out there, really seen it, the normal world felt flat somehow, incomplete, like you were walking around with knowledge that separated you from everyone else. A seagull landed on a piling near me, eyeing me curiously. The breeze picked up, carrying the smell of salt and fish and diesel. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with it. Tomorrow, I could go back to the city, find another warehouse job, go back to my apartment, pay my overdue rent with the fishing money, pretend none of this had happened. Or I could be back on this dock at 5 in the morning, duffel in hand, ready to board again. I patted my pocket, feeling the folded paper with the rules. Whatever I decided, I knew I'd keep that list. The ocean had marked me somehow, and those rules were my only protection against whatever waited out there in the deep water. The pull was already there, tugging at me like the tide. Despite everything I'd seen, everything I'd lost, I knew I might find myself back on that boat someday. I turned and walked away from the dock, the list of rules still in my pocket, the call of the sea already whispering behind me.